Welcome, History of St. Louis, to family number 2 of the beer families. We just completed the Lemp family and their history, and now we take a look at the second most famous, or probably for many St. Louisans, the most famous beer family, the Bushes. So today, once again, we're going to trace who the major individuals are that have a history with the brewery, take a look at some of their accomplishments within the brewery and within the city of St. Louis. So let's begin, because these guys have a much longer history. The whole thing actually starts with an Anheuser, Eberhard Anheuser. Eberhard Anheuser is going to come to America in 43 and make his way to St. Louis in 1845. However, just like with Johann Adam Lemp, the beer business is not his initial creation. He actually comes to St. Louis as a soap maker and gets control of a brewery when he loans a friend some money, and that friend is not able to pay back that loan, and so the friend has to give up his brewery in order to pay back the loan. And that is how Eberhard Anheuser comes to control a small little brewery back then. He absolutely had no idea how to run a brewery, which is where Adolphus Busch is going to come into play. These are some early pictures of Adolphus Busch. He was one of 20-some children, and since he was not the firstborn, he was not going to get much of the family fortune, and so he had to strike it on his own. He will end up coming to America in 1857, born in Germany in 1839. And when he comes to St. Louis, he does make his way straight to the St. Louis area because of its German connections. When he arrives in America, he is going to actually sell ingredients to make beer. And so that's how he comes in contact with Eberhard Anheuser. He is going to sell Eberhard Anheuser the stuff to make his beer. And so as they begin their professional relationship, Eberhard says, "Hey, I happen to have a daughter. You should meet her." And Adolphus Busch is introduced to Lily Anheuser. And eventually they will become married, and they will cement the relationship between the Anheusers and the Busches. Whereas Busch knows a lot about the beer business and Eberhard doesn't, really Adolphus is the one who's going to make the brewery what it will become. Lily is the only child of Eberhard's. They get married when she was 17. Adolphus was, I believe, 21. And Adolphus was 20 minutes late to his own wedding. Ladies, what do you feel about that? He had to close an important business deal, and he told Lily that was the reason why he was late. Now, this was before they had become the mega brewery that they will become, so not sure how that would go over today if you were 20 minutes late to your own wedding. And so that's how the Anheusers and the Busches get together. The brewery in 1865, Busch will buy out Anheuser's partners of the brewery, and so he will become a partner with his father-in-law, and at that time he was 26 years old. Remember, at this time, or a year ahead, the Lemps will move into their facility on Cherokee Street. The original beer that was produced was not very good, and that's because Eberhard Anheuser didn't know what he was doing, and so he just used cheap material to make the beer. But Busch was a pretty good salesman and was able to get the beer sold to different saloons and whatnot, mainly because they started sponsoring saloons, where they would make a deal that if they would help pay for that saloon or bar to be run, that they would only sell Anheuser-Busch products. And they were one of the first breweries to sponsor saloons to ensure that their beer would be sold within the bars of St. Louis. And so that's how the Anheuser-Busch product makes its way into the general public. By 1875, it will become a corporation. Now, remember, at this time, the Lemps are the #1 brewery, but the Anheisers are starting to grow, and the Busches are starting to grow. Originally, there were 480 shares of stock for the brewery. Eberhard Anheuser and his family members owned 240. Adolphus owned 238. And the guy who actually made the beer, Erwin Sproul, the brewmaster, owned 2 shares. Now, if you owned just one of these original 480 shares of stock, you would be a multi-millionaire today, because that stock now has probably millions of shares of stock associated with it. And the fact that Eberhard Anheuser owns 240 while Adolphus owns 238 is also important, because that means that Eberhard and the Anheuser family are the majority stock owners, which means that they run the company. What's going to happen in 1880, 5 years after it becomes a corporation, is that Eberhard is going to die of throat cancer, and that allows Adolphus to be president. This also marks the end of the Anheisers running the brewery and the beginning of the Busches, and the Busches will do so for the next 5 generations. And this is a sore spot between the Anheisers and the Busches, because the Anheisers feel that the Busches sort of stole the company away from the Anheuser family. The Busches say, hey, it wasn't until Adolphus got into the mix that the beer started becoming better and more popular. Adolphus will go into a stock buying frenzy, and eventually he will increase from 238 to 267. Lily also got 116 shares when her father died, and that then puts Adolphus in a very commanding position. And he once paid $60,000 for a single share, just so that he could gain more influence in the company. Even today, $60,000 would be a lot, but back then it was an enormous amount of money. Eventually, Adolphus Busch will begin to make close to $2 million a year. This was before there was an income tax. So he was basically banking $2 million a year, and this is in early 1900s money. So that would be even more so today. While Adolphus Busch is in command, the Busch Brewery will be the first to pasteurize beer. That means that you can now start to store it in other things other than kegs. And so now they start to bottle it so that they can preserve it for a longer period of time. And with the invention of the refrigerated railroad car, they can also start to sell the beer outside of the St. Louis area. And so Anheuser-Busch starts selling in Texas. And so they were the first brewery to sell their beer nationally. Eventually, they are going to come up with the recipe that is going to be their flagship recipe, and that is Budweiser. But the name Budweiser has some conflict and some intrigue behind it. We believe that the name Budweiser was attempted to be stolen by the Anheuser-Busch brewery. Budweiser was originally produced as a beer by a Czech brewery in the city of Budweis. And it was only sold in Europe because, again, they couldn't sell it very far from where they produced it. It was very popular in the area of Europe where it was sold. When Anheuser-Busch starts buying out smaller breweries in the United States, they buy one from a gentleman named C. Conrad, and he tells them that he has the rights to the name Budweiser in the United States. So then when Anheuser-Busch comes up with a product that they want to name Budweiser, and they do so in hopes that people will think of it as just as good as the one that is made in the Czech brewery, The Czech brewery finds out that their name has been stolen by Anheuser-Busch and sues them. Uh, when they attempted to copyright the name, they are taken to court by the Czech brewery. Eventually, Anheuser-Busch will settle out of court and will buy the naming rights to Budweiser. So those monks in the Czech end up getting a pretty sizable gain from it. And C. Conrad, instead of losing his job for lying, is later given a lifetime job with Anheuser-Busch. And so that is how the Budweiser name comes about. Budweiser has been their #1 selling beer. It was originally Budweiser, and now I think Bud Light outsells Budweiser. The Adolphus Busch will build a mansion on the grounds of the brewery called #1 Busch Place. Here you see some pictures of it. This is the front of the building. This is sort of the side front of the building. It was the largest house in St. Louis for a period of time. It had all sorts of German tapestries on the inside. There was a small lake around the house. There was a cannon somewhere around the house, and that would announce the departure and arrival of Adolphus Busch when he had to leave the city for business trips, and was supposedly just a spectacular house, but the children wanted to have their own houses, and eventually the house will be torn down in order to build extra office space on the grounds today. So unfortunately, this house no longer exists on the Busch grounds. So that's the #1 Busch Place story. On his 50th wedding anniversary, he gave his children each a large chunk of money to basically be able to buy whatever they wanted. Many of them bought houses and properties around the St. Louis area. I believe August Busch Sr. will use it to buy what is now today Grant's Farm. We'll get into that a little bit later. But the one story I did want to share with you, just to show you how competitive Adolphus was. Adolphus goes to the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, where they are going to hold the Best Beer in America contest, and they are going to hand out a blue ribbon to the winner. The beer was going to be judged in 3 categories: chemical composition, appearance, and then finally taste. Anheuser-Busch and Budweiser wins for taste. They win for appearance. And so all they have to do is pass the chemical composition part and they would win. And supposedly it came back that there were some impurities in Budweiser and they lost to the Pabst family. And if you know anything about the Pabst family and their beer is called Pabst Blue Ribbon. And if you look on their cans or bottles, it says voted best since 1893, which is this contest. Well, Adolphus Busch is not very happy. He definitely does not believe that there are any impurities in it. And he goes on this fact-finding mission to see how this contest was rigged against him. He basically ends up going to France and he tracks down a member of the contest judging panel, and he wants this judge to change their vote so that Adolphus and Budweiser will win. Well, when they arrive in France, that judge is tipped off, and so that judge goes to Germany to sort of get away from Adolphus. Adolphus then goes to Germany to find the person. The person finds out that Adolphus is looking for him in Germany and goes back to France, where they eventually run into each other. And Busch takes this judge out to dinner and basically says, "What's it going to take for me to get you to change your vote?" And the judge is like, "Listen, I'm not changing my vote. It's been so long that nobody even cares anymore." And Adolphus Busch at that time whips out a checkbook and writes the gentleman a check for a quite sizable sum, and the judge agrees to switch his vote. So he sends a cable back to the person who was running the contest in Chicago. Adolphus Busch jumps on a ship and sails back to the United States and goes to Chicago and goes to the residence of that head of the contest and basically says, "Did you get the cable? And I want to be awarded the blue ribbon." And that contest coordinator basically said, "Forget about it. It's over. It's done with." And that is why today Pabst still carries on the blue ribbon name, and Budweiser is not able to show off its award. The other thing that I do want to emphasize is that Adolphus Busch did not drink one drop of his own beer. He actually hated beer. He called it schlop, which I'm pretty sure is pretty close to another S word in English. He was a big wine connoisseur, and he drank wine and supposedly had a extremely fine palate for wines and could tell you what a wine was just by its taste. So know that even though he becomes a major brewery in the United States, he does not drink his own product. What ends up happening to Adolphus is he will go on a trip to Germany to visit his ancestral home, and he will die while on a hunting campaign, and dies in Germany. His body is brought back where we have one of the most elaborate funerals in St. Louis history. Thousands of people view his body. They had to have all sorts of hotel rooms reserved for out-of-town guests. There were 180 pallbearers, 5,000 brewery workers viewed the body. Then when it was open to the general public, they had over 30,000 people open it. The only thing that I can think of in St. Louis history recently where we would have those same numbers would be when the famous Cardinals broadcaster Jack Buck died. Many of you were not born, but if you ask your parents and your grandparents about that, they will remember that for sure. 25 trucks were needed for all the floral arrangements. St. Louis actually halted business at 2 p.m. for 5 minutes, where they blew sirens downtown and literally everything came to a stop. That's how well thought of and honored he was in St. Louis. The funeral procession began at the brewery and then went north to Bellefontaine Cemetery. Over 100,000 St. Louisans lined the streets. Originally, he was buried in a mausoleum with no markings, and then that mausoleum just was not fancy enough for his wife, who thought that her husband deserved better. And so they redid a mausoleum at the cost of $250,000 back then. And it's the one that we studied at Bellefontaine Cemetery today. And so it's just him and his wife, Lily, in that mausoleum. He was worth about $60 million at the time of his death. That would be worth about $1.5 billion today. So to say he was rich was a little bit of an understatement. When he dies, his son, August A. Busch Sr., will take over. His oldest son dies at age 15, and that then allowed August Busch to become the oldest son. Originally, he went to his father at age 19 and said, "Listen, I really don't want to have anything to do with the brewery. I want to be a cowboy." And after Adolphus kind of freaked out, Adolphus then went ahead and bought August Busch Sr. a ranch out in the West. I want to say either Colorado or Montana. August Busch runs his ranch for about 2 years out there and then eventually comes back to St. Louis and says, "You know what? I don't mind taking over. I'll take over the brewery." And so when his father dies in 1913, he will take over the brewery from his father. He will be known for taking some of that money that he gets from his father's wedding anniversary, and he will buy Grant's Farm and turn it into his own personal zoo. A lot of people think that Grant's Farm is and has always been an amusement park. It hasn't. Its original purpose was to be the Busch family estate. And because they wanted lots of land, they also wanted lots of animals, and that's how the animals got there. He will also be known for guiding Anheuser-Busch through Prohibition, which was by no means easy. But unlike the Lemps, the Bushes are going to do a multiple amount of things to try to stay somewhat solvent. Initially, for about the first 4 years of Prohibition, they make a non-alcoholic beer called Bevo, which looks like it's going to be as popular as their alcoholic products. But then after about 3 or 4 years, when moonshine starts popping up and people really want their alcohol, the moonshine is going to kill Bevo sales. And eventually they're going to have to stop producing it because they're losing money from it. But because to make beer, you need ingredients that you also can make bread with, namely yeast and barley and malt, they are going to sell their yeast and barley stores to bakers around the St. Louis and Midwest area so that they can keep money coming in. They also try an ice cream business and a soda business. I think they tried a chocolate soda. They also opened up a restaurant called Bevo Mill. So they tried all sorts of things to keep money coming in. August Busch Sr. will try to join St. Louis's most exclusive country clubs, but because he was beer money and because he was the son of an immigrant, most of those prestigious country clubs would not accept him. So he just opened up his own country club, and it's right at Highway 40 and Gravois Road. It's called Sunset Hills Country Club. It is still around today, and that was started by the Bushes. This is the house that Busch will build in the middle of Grant's farm. It is not part of the general tour, but you can see it from some of the walking areas of the children's park. It was made to look like a French chateau. It was at one time the largest house in Missouri. I believe it had somewhere around 26 rooms. And today, the family will rent it out, just the first story of the house, for wedding parties and stuff. But the upstairs areas are not accessible to the general public. And I am going to put a student video. They were able to interview and get inside of the Busch Mansion, so I will post that link so that you can see that video. It is interesting to see what it looks like on the inside. This is a picture of the restaurant, Bevo Mill. We studied a little bit about this when we took a look at Fachwerk architecture back in the German immigration section. Now it's called Das Bevo, and it is a banquet hall. As you can see, a very nice interior to it. Looks like a German beer hall on the inside, and it has the giant windmill that gives away its location in South St. Louis. So in 1933, the United States ends Prohibition, and Anheuser-Busch is getting ready to celebrate, and they start making secret batches of beer to be ready for the moment that Prohibition ends. This is a picture of August Busch Sr. here in the middle with his oldest son, Adolphus, and his second oldest son, Gussie. And they are prepping a case of Budweiser to be sent to President Roosevelt, thanking him for fighting against Prohibition. And so this is the photo of them for that case to be shipped off to Washington, D.C. This was the scene outside of the brewery in St. Louis. And at midnight, when Prohibition ended, they rolled up the garage doors and started handing out free beer. And they had a fireworks display to celebrate. And then they began the production of Budweiser and all of the other products that Anheuser-Busch made that night. KMOX Radio had a live show at the event. So this was a big deal in St. Louis history. Going back for a second, though, Gussie, his second son, wanted to do something special for his father and basically getting them to survive Prohibition and basically for all of the hard work that his father had done keeping the family afloat. So Gussie decided to purchase for his father a team of Clydesdale horses, and supposedly when August Busch Sr. saw the horses hitched up and connected to the Budweiser wagon in their uh, custom gear, supposedly August Busch Sr. started crying and said it was the most beautiful thing he ever saw, and that is why uh, the Clydesdales become the official symbol of Anheuser-Busch Brewery and have done so to this day. To this day, the Bushes own the largest herd of Clydesdale horses. And we'll talk a little bit later on about what it takes to be a Clydesdale horse. There are some very specific criteria to be involved. Unfortunately for August Busch Sr., he started having some medical conditions that brought him a lot of pain that he just could not remedy. He was taking shots of pure morphine to numb the pain, and eventually the pain just had become too much, and he becomes the only major Bush family member to commit suicide, and he does it at the Bush estate at Grant's Farm. And when he dies, obviously it becomes a major deal in the St. Louis newspapers. When he dies, his son Adolphus will take over for about 10 years, and then his oldest son will die, and that then allows Gussie to take over. Unlike his father, August Busch Sr., Gussie knew from day one that he wanted to eventually run the company, and so he will basically try to get every job possible in the brewery so that he could understand his family's company from the bottom up. So he literally worked in every category of the brewery. He worked in the brew house, he worked in the bottling plant, he worked in shipping, he worked in sales, he worked in advertising, so that when this day came where he took over, he was probably the most prepared Bush out of all of the Bushes that ever to take over. He was known for his playboy lifestyle. He will be married 4 times in his life. His third wife, he was 56 and she was 27, and he will father his last child when he was 67 years old. So he definitely was prolific in his life for all sorts of different things. What he was known for before him, the St. Louis brewery made every beer to be shipped nationally and internationally. And he realized that it could be fresher and possibly better if it could be made in the different locations in the United States and shipped to the consumer quicker. And so he will begin to make regional breweries. Now, the St. Louis brewery is going to be the master headquarters, but he then started to open up breweries all around, and I believe today there are 12 different Anheuser-Busch breweries around the United States, with St. Louis being the headquarters. They will be the first to advertise on TV. They will be the first to go from bottling to aluminum cans, which was part of the recycle movement of the 1970s. But probably the most famous thing outside of the brewery that Gussie did was in 1953, the Cardinals were put on for sale, and there was talk that an out-of-town person was going to buy the Cardinals and move them out. And Anheuser-Busch was approached to buy the Cardinals and their stadium in order to keep them in St. Louis, and Gussie did that, in part because he said that there was no other better place to sell beer than at the Cardinals games, and so he wanted them to stay in St. Louis. So Gussie will buy the St. Louis Cardinals and their stadium called Sportsman Park in 1953. He will change the name Sportsman's Park to Budweiser, or to Busch Stadium, named after his family. They wanted to name it Budweiser Stadium but Major League Baseball would not let them name it after a beer, so they named it after the family. And then eventually, Gussie will build what we now know as Old Bush Stadium in 1966. And then Old Bush Stadium will be torn down to build the one that we have today in 2006. And so he will go ahead and own and run the Cardinals until his death in 1989, and then they sell it to the current owners of the Cardinals, the DeWitt family, in 1990. Gussie will also open some amusement parks in Florida and California known as Busch's Gardens. They had a family property in California, and so that's where they opened up the Busch's Gardens in California, and then later they expand to Florida. We already talked about the Clydesdales, and Gussie loved drinking Budweiser. In fact, that was the only thing that he drank, and he got so good at drinking Budweiser that he could drink a Budweiser and tell you what brewery in the United States it came from, because everybody's water tastes a little bit different, and he had such a taste for Budweiser that he could tell the difference. He could tell the difference between a St. Louis one and a Colorado one. The other story that I find real interesting, that I'm not sure when it started, I'm pretty sure that it started before Gussie, was that whenever there was a Busch child that was born, the very first thing that that Busch child tasted was not its mother's milk, but 3 drops of the true lifeblood of the Busch family, which was Budweiser. And so every Busch child was given 3 drops of Budweiser to be the first thing that baby tasted in life. Not sure that would go over very well with many families today, but that was the custom. Here are some scenes from the house at Grant's farm that Gussie lived in. This was their trophy room. They were prolific hunters, and they often mounted their trophies on the wall. Here's another shot of Gussie with one of his children this is his 3rd wife, Trudy Bullhauser. She was the one that was 27 when he was 53 when they got married. And then this is their personal chapel that is on the grounds of Grant's farm. They obviously did not want to go to church with the general public, and so they had a priest come and do Sunday ceremonies with them at their chapel. Eventually, what's going to happen is Gussie is going to use the brewery money to purchase all sorts of things which he thought was just good advertisement for the brewery, namely boats and ships and railroad cars and airplanes and blimps. And August Busch III, his son, who went to business school, thought that his dad was sort of excessively spending the brewery's money. And so in 1971, August Busch III approached the board of directors for Anheuser-Busch and talked them into firing his dad and naming him the new brewery president. And he claimed that he could save the brewery money by getting rid of all the extravagant spending that his father had done. Legend has it that when the board of directors announced this to Gussie, there was a doctor in the other room that was ready to be there in case Gussie dropped dead of a heart attack from being told that they were taking away the brewery from him. But in 1971, August Busch III is going to have his dad removed from the board of directors as president. And the only thing that he's allowed to keep and run are the St. Louis Cardinals, because they said that that was his second passion. And so he was able to keep that. And so August Busch III will take over. That was in, 1975. It's known as the coup in St. Louis history. And it will forever divide the family. August Busch III will not get along with his half brothers and sisters that are younger in age. Those ones that were younger in age were very protective of their father, and they thought that August Bush III was trying to destroy their father, his father. Under August Bush III, Anheuser-Busch comes up with a lighter calorie beer called Bud Light, which ends up becoming its bestseller. Uh, Drunk driving was becoming a problem, and so they start the drinking education campaign of know when to say when, and started talking to uh, bar managers about being able to identify drunk people and not letting them leave. They're going to expand their world into a different amusement park called SeaWorld. About 5 to 10 years ago, the Bush family and the Bush Brewery will get out of the SeaWorld community, and now that SeaWorld is getting rid of some of its major whales, like the orca whales and whatnot, they are dramatically changing, but they had been outside of the Anheuser-Busch Brewery for some time. August Bush III lives out in St. Charles at the Bush Wildlife Preserve. And so how do you live in St. Charles but work in downtown St. Louis? You take a helicopter to work. And so he was a pilot. He flew his helicopter to work. He was also known as a workaholic and would work 14-hour days and expected everybody else to do the same. And so he was the major player in the Anheuser-Busch Brewery until he starts to try to turn things over to his oldest son, August Bush IV. He does go to MICDS, but is kicked out, and then starts looking for schools to send his kid to, and one of those was Parkway West. August Bush III then started interviewing principals at different schools and supposedly went to Parkway West and interviewed the principal there. And one of the things that August Bush III asked was that he could drop off his son and pick up his son via helicopter, and that they would use an upper soccer field to do that. And the principal supposedly said, absolutely not. He will either take the bus or you will drive him to school, but we will not be having a helicopter drop him off every day. And so that is how August Bush the fourth got to Parkway West High School every day. He was driven there and then eventually drove himself. He was known for problems with the law. The drug bust story actually happens during the summer in between either his freshman year and sophomore year in college or senior year in high school, freshman year of college. But he's coming home from East St. Louis or the Illinois side. He is speeding along Highway 40. The police try to pull him over. He does not pull over. In the process of evading the police cars, some unmarked and some marked, he almost hits a police officer with the car. They eventually have to shoot out his back tire. And when they finally get him pulled over, he basically says that he wasn't pulling over because he thought that the unmarked police cars were actually kidnappers who were trying to kidnap him. And eventually he was let go and left alone without any charges. He does go to college in Arizona, and after one night at the bars, he is going home with a waitress that he met at the bar. On the way back to his place, he gets into a car accident and hits a telephone pole. He gets out of the car and walks home to his apartment, which was less than a mile away, and leaves the girl in the passenger seat. What he didn't realize is that she was dead. Somebody reports the accident to the police. The police show up to the scene. They run the license plates and find out that it is him. They go to his place in Arizona. They knock on the door. He's got an ice pack on his head. This was obviously a couple hours later. They ask him whether he was involved in a car accident. He says he doesn't remember. They place him under arrest. He calls his father, who sends lawyers and uh, a group of communications people to try to keep the story hush hush. Somehow the blood sample of August Bush IV was lost or destroyed accidentally. And so, because of that, the charges against him had to be dropped because they couldn't prove that he was drunk. And so he ends up serving no jail time for the death of the waitress. The waitress's family do sue him in civil court and win an undisclosed amount of money. Later on, he will have another girlfriend in 2010 die at his home. When they do a tox screen, they find that there is cocaine and other drugs in her body. He claimed that he had no idea how those got into her system and faced no criminal charges from the city of Frontenac. In 2008, he will take over Bud Light line, and in 2009, he will take over Anheuser-Busch Brewery. He gives a speech at the Brewers Convention and is talking in garbled language and was sort of unbalanced, and they had to walk him off the stage very quickly. This then starts to spout all sorts of rumors about him and drug use and alcoholism. He claimed that he had just taken allergy medication and was just lightheaded from that. But that speech then really puts his leadership in question. And less than a year later, a foreign company named InBev will go about buying a majority share of the Anheuser-Busch stock, some from actual members of the Bush family who did not trust August Bush IV to be running it, and so they just decided to sell out. And that is how the company known as InBev will take over Anheuser-Busch in late 2009. And that marks the end of the Bush's control over the brewery. And so today he does get some compensation from the brewery. Obviously, he still owns some stock in it, but the Bushes no longer control Anheuser-Busch. And this has had a major impact on the St. Louis area as more and more of the company functions are going outside of the St. Louis area. Here's a little bit of a timeline. Again, some of it is things that we've seen. What you will notice is that Budweiser is introduced in 1876, but that is not the only beer that they make. They also make Michelob. In the 1970s, they make Busch beer. They also then have bought companies, and so they own a whole family of beers, some foreign, some American. But the family of beers that Anheuser-Busch controls today is quite extensive. And that's our look at the Busch family. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll talk to you soon.